Okay, and here we are, episode 2 of the Get It Greenlit podcast. And joining me this time, our first official guest, and not a stranger to me, my cousin. Talk to him probably more often than I talk to my wife. Dan, how's it going?
Not too bad, Brent. How are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. So, you are coming on to tell your story about a script that you have written or you're continuing to write. I think you're still working on. It's a work in progress. But before we talk about that, just give a little background. Like I said, you are my cousin, and we talk, I'm going to say at least a couple hours a day is what it adds up to daily about movies and about our ideas for making movies and all that kind of stuff. And going back to the first episode where I mentioned, I talked about Dirty Pool, one of the first screenplay I ever officially wrote from start to finish, and I mentioned that did get made into a film, and you were actually the filmmaker on that.
That's right, yeah. And I must say that I'm thankful that somebody out there did a comprehensive overview of that particular thing. Of course, it had to be the writer of it, but hey, I'll take anything.
Well, exactly, sure. But so yeah, we talked about that on, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to that episode.
Oh, yes. I did listen to your first episode, and that's why I'm here, because I'm like, hey, you need somebody to talk to, right?
Yeah, there we go. I can't just sit here and talk to myself the whole time.
But yeah, no. Yeah, that was, for me, yeah, like I said, for me, just listen to it from your perspective, hearing about it, because I just remember when you wrote it, you kind of handed it off to us, so then I think we were trying to arrange it so that you were there when we were shooting, but I think it was just, I think your work at the time kind of had a conflict there, but so I kind of had to do it on my own, which it's anything that I get to do with you, it's a lot better to get your input on it, because mostly when it's just me, you feel like, okay, well, I guess I'm kind of doing this right. You kind of want somebody there, and even like filmmakers in general, they always kind of want the original writer around to stick around, or just a writer. And it was just me, because I think I remember I took all your drafts and I made the final version of it later, and it was just, and yeah, one of the things I enjoyed was that I was like, God, you need to be around so that we could have pointed out those plot holes and stuff
yeah. If I remember right, the shooting version of it differed, not a lot, but a little bit from the one that I talked about on the first episode.
Right. Because I was like looking through it, and I was like, man, why didn't I just shoot that? But no, I just remember it was kind of something where I was like, okay, I'm kind of getting down to the wire here. I need to start filming something, and this actress that's going to play this part is only going to be here for this amount of time, and need to do something. And I'm like, oh, right, great. Like, this is actual like filmmaking for me, because I've read all those stories and heard about all the how delays and stuff would get in the way, and they were like, okay, you got to make this now and you got to do it. And I think with that one, I was just like, okay, let's get out and do it, and then we'll put it in the competition. And as we heard on the last episode, it was our film along with another one that was like a pretty straightforward documentary about somebody's brother that was special, that those didn't win. And
okay.
I was, but then just the part of me was like, God, the stuff that they did pick, I wasn't that big of a fan of. And like the one that I thought was good, that was like a stop motion movie, I was like, okay, that's gonna win, because hey, that's good technique. And it just got like a really low level award. So even for that one, I just kind of felt like, oh boy, it was. I just remember that night we got home, and I got some whiskey and I was watching The Shining. That's how I got through it.
That's how you coped.
Yeah. So, and I guess with that one, I was just like, at that point, I was like, okay, at this point, try not to make too many compromises when you're filming this. Like, only do it if you feel like 100%, like, okay, this is what I want to do. And you don't have to be like, oh, like, I really don't want that poster from Blade Runner in this shot, but I have to put it there because I can't get it down in time, or of course I think about that. I was like, why didn't I just film another room or something like that?
Well, and you're talking about filming inside. I think you did it in your apartment.
That's right.
And that was one of the things I touched on in the first episode, is that script specifically, and quite a few that I did after that were all, like I said, written keeping in mind the resources we had available, and writing in the with the mindset of this is going to be filmed someday, that by us, that we want to try and make it ourselves, and so we need to make the story work around what we have available to us. And anytime you do that, you're going to be making the major compromises like you're talking about, and having a setting in an apartment or a living room of your own house, when really you might want it somewhere else. And that's kind of a good segue into the story you're going to talk about today. Fantasy is that started out that way, from what I believe. I'll let you tell the story, but that idea, that concept started as, again, I think we were going to make another short film. I don't know if we were going to put it in a contest or anything, but we were going to write that as a short film, and we were, again, trying to keep in mind what we were going to have available to us and the places we could shoot it at, and write the story around that, basically. And it never materialized, and I know you initially came up with the idea of the general concept of it, and then we tried to make it into a short. We tried to modernize it because it was really going to be a period piece, and that didn't work out. And you then took it, basically threw all that out the window, said, I don't care. I'm not going to keep in mind what I will have available to me or what I won't have available to me. And you wrote the story, I think, that I assume you were pretty passionate about, and whatever the inspiration you had behind it to write, you followed that and developed it into this full script that we're going to talk about.
That's correct, yeah. And just kind of the idea in general for this, like yeah, as you probably see on the episode title, how it's spelled with an IE instead of with a Y. Like, I'm not sure if you could pronounce it as fantasy or fantasy, kind of with the German flair to it. So it's so I guess just calling it fantasy is just close enough, because with that I was just like, okay, what's German for fantasy? And it's with a PH and an IE at it. And I was like, okay, well, let's just call it fantasy, and we'll just put an IE at the end of it. And it's kind of like Fantasia.
Well, that's clever. I didn't see that. The first time you showed it to me, I'm like, oh, I just spelled it wrong, but I'm just not going to point it out,
Okay. Yeah, it was fully on the script and stuff. But yeah, that's going to be the title page and everything. That is essential whenever you're doing stuff like that, is to do a spell check. So it's like, make sure, okay, do you want to spell this with an IE and everything? Yeah. But it was just, It just sounded like it was like something different, and every time I talk to people about it, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's a interesting title and stuff," and I'm just like, "Yeah, I just only want to make a movie that lives up to that title."
Right. And so I mean, again, this is the second episode, so this could completely change, but the format I kind of toyed around with in the first episode, when I started talking about Dirty Pool, was, kind of, I want to have the storyteller kind of give a brief synopsis or a general overview of the story, almost kind of like a verbal trailer. Like if you were to sit down and watch a trailer for the movie, obviously you're going to see that visually and all that. So of course, since we can't do that, kind of give me just an overview of what it's about, and then at that point, kind of start from the beginning. And I mean, you can go all the way back to the origins of when we started it as a short film, and where it went from there, but touching on your inspirations for certain things, and just kind of, if you want to start there, I think we can do that and try to keep it somewhat organized, so if somebody's listening, it should be pretty easy to follow.
Okay. Basically the general concept of it is a German woman, or a girl in this case, like it kind of varies, still can't quite decide how old this certain individual should be, but the idea is that she's somebody that's really immersed in fairy tales and is very familiar with all of the stories, and basically the whole story takes place during World War II, during the Holocaust, when she's on the run, and kind of the way that she's kind of coping with the situation that she's in is that she's recounting these tales and also trying to make sense of her world that it's in, using the realm of fantasy, and that's why we called it that. And this particular version, like the version that we're talking about that I actually wrote a script for, it was just kind of a exercise in trying to get one particular segment or part of the story that I had, because this, as we'll go into it, it spans out really long with kind of backstory that I'm not even sure will be even in the script, or something that could be developed for other parts of it. But I think like the best way to do this would be a big long format version of storytelling that's used in like Game of Thrones and Westworld and stuff, where you're essentially watching like a 24-hour movie, but it's just split into hour-long parts. And I think that's like the best way that I could make all of these story elements come together with what I have, other
Okay,
than just other than just taking like one little part of it. It's like, okay, I'll make that into a short, which is what I did with this script.
okay, so you're talking about not necessarily looking at like a 2 hour feature film type of a script. You're talking about either a, you know, 6, 7, 8 part series or a
Pretty
series
much,
of
yeah.
short film. Okay.
Because I felt like there's like another part that I was like, okay, I have like 6 parts of how I want the story to go, and I feel like at this point, for what I have with me, I only have about like 3 parts of 6 stuff. So I still have, that's like part of my deal is like, you really need to sit around and try to develop what those other parts are. But
I didn't
but I
realize how much you have developed this past the last time
right,
we talked about it.
I
This
don't, yeah.
podcast, this episode may need to be split into 2 parts itself.
Maybe, yeah, because it is, yeah, because it does reach back pretty far, because I think just the whole first notion of doing a story like this, because I think I do remember when I first told you about it, you were like a little stood back. You're like, oh, I didn't know you were into this kind of story or something like that.
Yeah, it caught me by surprise. So kind of tell me what got you into that? What got you inspired to write, this type of a story as opposed to something different?
Well, it's something that's been around since I think when we were, I guess I should say we because you're a couple of years older than me. But when I was in 6th grade, we studied World War II in history, and it was like a full like month-long thing. And to us, when we were in 6th grade, like me and my friends, we all saw World War II as like this great adventure that actually happened because all the what we were really familiar with was like what we saw in movies and like how Nazis were the bad guys for Indiana Jones, namely in the
Yeah.
movie The Rocketeer. Like we just thought like they were just these people that were bent on taking over the world, and they had all of these weird things about them that they wanted to use against them. Like we had no idea what they were really like in real life during the war, which
Right.
not it's not to say like, oh yeah, they were having stuff like that, but that was kind of a minor thing that they made bigger in the movies. But I just remember that it was probably like the second or third week that we were studying it, and we were kind of getting our dose of like, okay, how this war came about. And I just remember that the teacher was telling us, okay, next week we're going to start studying the Holocaust. And when I first heard that word Holocaust, I said, the Hall of what? And he goes, Holocaust. And it was like, it was this, it was a terrible tragedy that endured on this. And I want all of you to watch a movie that's going to be on starting this weekend. It was like on Sunday. There's going to be a 2-part movie called Anne Frank: The Whole Story, and I want everybody in here to watch that because that's really going to tie into what we're going to be talking about this week. So I was like, okay, I'll check this out, and I feel like that Anne Frank was a name that I heard about because you know when you're in school you always hear certain names come up like her and like Helen Keller
Right.
and certain people, just people that just they say about but you don't really dwell upon because I guess you're thinking about something else. But anyway, I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch this because I guess not so much like, oh, the teacher told you to. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm genuinely
You were
interested. Like,
interested, yeah.
what's this all about? So I'm watching this, and I have to say that I did develop a crush on the actress who was playing Anne Frank, who was like pretty close to the real thing, and I was just drawn in with this whole story about this girl who seemed, just had a really, nice personality and stuff. And it was something that I was not around, that I was not around in my 6th grade class at
Right.
all. It
Right.
just because and then it drew me in that also that the character was Jewish,
Uh-huh.
and I was a big fan, and I am a big fan of the movie The Jazz Singer with Neil Diamond, and there's a lot of Jewish culture in that, and I was like, oh, this is interesting that they're expanding upon that more because I didn't know anyone that was Jewish in my class at all or anything like that. So I didn't really, I didn't have Paul from the Wonder Years as a friend, so that I could have learned all about that.
You
I
could
wish
have
I
gone
would have,
in.
but I didn't. But
So all of this passion and inspiration for this project stemmed with a girl. It all started from a girl. Why am I not surprised?
yeah, it's just, I was, enamored with what this girl had to say, what she thought, and then. Of course, when we came back the first day, like it was just kind of all like, oh yeah, that girl was cute. I talked about this, talked about that, and then they were like, okay, well now, like when you get into the second part of this, that's when it's gonna really get to you and stuff
Right.
because
Yeah.
but because I guess the teacher kind of knew, like he knew what was going to happen. It was like, okay, they're going to find him in the attic, and then they're going to be taken to the concentration camp and everything. And if you ever see that, they play it up like to the nth degree of like like at the end of that you are just shattered that this woman is
Yeah.
not with us anymore.
Right.
And that was the point, when people first read that and they saw the when it was a stage play, was that they were really taken by somebody, like this account of somebody that's not with us anymore.
Right.
So I remember being, pretty upset enough of that, and just to add more to it, it was like our week at the library. It was like every week you spent like one day at the library, and our teacher was like, "Oh, well, I understand that you are studying the Holocaust. Well, we have this 20-minute movie that will show you that will show you that ties into that." And it was called Nightmare: The Immigration of Joachim and Rachel. And what was interesting was that Rachel was played by a very, very young Sarah Jessica Parker.
No kidding.
And it's like I can't remember if we noticed that at the time or maybe like the girls did or something because
Now,
I guess Sex in the City was on at that time. They probably recognized her, but
well,
I just remember that I didn't notice it at all. I just remember I was so I was so transfixed by what this movie was doing because what it had was that it had these two young kids that were immigrating to America, and it was all in color, and you saw them like like on the boat going to Ellis Island, and they had these flashbacks to when they were in their native country before they left. So I guess almost as a storyteller, you're like, oh well, the tension's all dissolved because you know that they survived because they're going to America. But
right.
for those 20 minutes, I was in the zone where it was like, okay, the parents are like, okay, you got to hide it in here. You got to, when this Nazi comes in and he's going to be like, oh, you have two children here. Where are they? It's like, oh, well, we don't have them. It's like, oh, you're a liar. It's a pretty intense thing. And I just remember just looking at this the whole time, and I just felt like I was watching it play before my eyes, and as this movie goes on, they kind of show the hardships that they had to face while they're trying to on the run. And something I really remembered was that when they're on this train, they have a shot of the train, and you could tell it was a toy. But since it was in black and white, it kind of got away with it. But I just remember I was like, "Oh, that's a toy train," but I was still like wondering, like, "Okay, what's going to happen next?" So like,
Yeah, you didn't
it
let it
didn't
affect
matter
you.
that those special effects weren't top notch,
Now
and
you
I
said
just yeah,
you said it was like a 20-minute video. So was it like a little short film, or was it
yeah,
just she
yeah.
was just showing you okay.
Yeah, it was just like a little short thing. Like I think that there was like a whole series of them. I don't, yeah, because I was like, because
Okay.
like over the years, it's like because it took me a while to actually find it again, and I do have it because I eventually found it because I was always like, yeah, because I was always like, God, I gotta see that movie again because it took a long time even just to figure out what the title was.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so when I saw it again, everything came back into my head a little bit, and but I guess the long short of it was that I was really captured by like that sense of like, oh my God, like you really are in a situation where you're stuck in this place, you can't get out. And it sounded really compelling to me. And I remember sitting in my enrichment classes because I didn't take band, and it would I would always just like try to come up with stories. And like one of the famous ones was, I was like, oh, there should be a movie about a cop who hunts down robots, but then he finds out he's a robot instead, and everything gets screwed. And I found out, oh, good job, you just described the movie Blade Runner, and it is, and I was just
That
like,
happens.
oh darn, that didn't happen. But anyway, but I think one of those things when I was in grade school was that I was talking about like, oh, well, wouldn't it be interesting if you found yourself in that time period and you're trying to survive and do all that stuff, which I guess at the time I was thinking about John Landis's Twilight Zone segment where he had Vic Morrow, who was a bigot, arrive in Nazi Germany and like what happens there. But I guess at the time I was thinking like, well, what kind of perspective would it be if I was a kid or something
Right.
like that in there? And you meet Anne Frank and stuff, and just I just remember like these were the things that I was thinking about when I was in school.
Yeah.
But
So I mean, but yeah, what I'm hearing is so you've got. I mean, again, like I said, I'm your cousin, and when we started talking about this movie, I knew that when you came up with the idea, I thought, okay, well, he's got he watched some World War World War I, World War II movie, something that got him interested in Germany, and now he's got an idea for it. But I had no idea that this goes all the way back to sixth grade, really. So I
right,
mean,
yeah,
this is like the true definition of when you talk about a writer or a storyteller, reaching back for, inspiration or a passion that they had in their life. I mean, this is a grade A example of that. I mean,
yeah,
this is
yeah.
something that you've built on since sixth grade. It sounds like,
It's
and
like
eventually has evolved into this script now that you're writing.
right, yeah, and it's just like because there is like some stuff I don't remember at all from sixth grade, but I can tell you that I definitely remember
That's why
studying
you
the
haven't written any
Holocaust.
movies about that.
Right? Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
why
yeah,
you've
yeah.
written
That
no
should
other
that
movies
should
from
that
sixth
should
grade.
just be. Yeah, I just described the movie for you. Some kid gets inspired by this one deal. Yeah, there you go. There's a script for you. But nah, nah, no. Just
That's a movie in and of itself.
right. But
Okay,
probably
so
not a good one. But
yeah, so you've got that, so that lays some groundwork for us. So
yeah,
you've got that knowledge, that inspiration building up, and so at this point, we're searching for our next project, our next
right.
short film, whatever we're gonna make, and that's where you came up with this idea. And like I said, I touched on it a little bit before, and you can go into it further if you
Yeah,
want, but we
yeah.
kind of flipped it and tried to give it a modern spin just because we knew we wouldn't be able to film any type of a period piece, going back to Nazi Germany and that sort of thing.
Right.
And that obviously didn't work out, and we kind of dropped it and moved on to something different. But that's when you took it then and reverted it back, from what I understand. So if you want to talk
Yeah.
about that and kind of get us into the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of what sparked it again, because I guess like often on I would think about it, I would think like, oh yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing, but just whatever it was at the time, I didn't really dwell upon it. But I didn't really start thinking about it until I started to go to college. I'd finished junior college, and now I was at Wichita State, I guess I could say, and I met somebody that was in the theater department, and she was telling me about how she wanted to do an anthology movie that was all set at the library. And I was like, "Oh, well, that's an interesting idea. Like, let me see what if I can contribute something to it." So I came back with, "Okay, here's my idea. I want it to be that Anne Frank comes into the library and sees that somebody is reading her diary, and she reacts, kind of indifferently, that her ideas and everything are in this, and this total stranger is reading it, and how would she react to that?"
Yeah, so you're
And
talking like a modern day Anne Frank walks in.
right, yeah,
And
yeah,
sees that.
or even I it was kind of it was it could have been like a modern day one, or even if it was just like some kind of aberration, or like her
Embodiment
spirit
of
in there.
her.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I'm just like, oh, because kind of
that's
that kind
cool.
of goes through your head when you're reading someone else's work. Like, what if this person came in and saw you reading it, like how would they react to it, or like what kind of questions would they ask you? And that was
Yeah.
my idea for a story. So it's just going to be a simple like, okay, somebody's at the desk, somebody's reading it, the person comes over, and then they talk, and then that was going to be my segment.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, it didn't come up. So I was still like with that idea, and I was thinking like, oh man, that would be something. And the actress that did appear in Dirty Pool, like I remember telling her this idea, and I was like, I want you to play this part of, kind of this Anne Frank, because I was saying Anne Frank at the time because that's who it was going to be obviously based on. So I would call her that until I came up with a name for something, and she was really into it. She was like, "Oh yeah, I can do a German accent, and I could make it sound authentic," because I think she took some German classes, and
Hmm.
and uh, and and so I was just like, okay, that's great. I have an actress that I can have play this part. Now I can feel comfortable trying to develop this, and I think that's when I told you about it.
Right.
And yeah, when I first told you about it, and I was just kind of like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out like an idea of because I think at that point it was moved from like a library to like, okay, how about it's the bookstore or something, and somebody sees them there, or because I guess I had this visual of like, oh, she goes to a shelf and she sees like all of like her book there, like all of those there,
Uh,
and then I was like,
yeah, I remember. Yeah, I think I remember the bookstore thing coming up, but didn't at some point along the way there, didn't you see? And I can't. What is it called? The Book Thief, that
right,
movie that came
yeah,
out. And I think you had went and saw that, or you had just seen it, and you thought maybe it was going to parallel that too much, or
right.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, because I remember you bringing up the bookstore thing, but I remember we didn't stick with that, and I want to say that was the reason why.
Yeah, because yeah, actually, like Book Thief kind of was something that I was like, oh damn, they did so much better. Where it was like, oh,
They had a
like
budget.
right, it had a budget, but it was a book. It was a book at one point too. But I just remember like, oh, that was a good notion where it's like it's all told through Death's perspective, and
Yeah,
and just like all the events and everything that happened in it. I was like, oh man, that's so close to what I want to do, and I think kind of since then I've been kind of like, okay, well, you probably can't take too many of those elements. You need to kind of give it more fantastical spin on it. And then that's like the other thing is that you're just like, oh man, if I'm like really taking this to this level, and like, am I disrespecting those that actually lived through this, or and I think that was kind of like one of the things that kind of drew you away from it. But I've talked to
yeah,
people about it, and they're just like, oh, it's a if you spin a good yarn, anybody will listen to it, and that's just
sure.
my deal. It's like I need to make a yarn that's worth listening to. But but I just remember, yeah, because I'm looking at our initial notes for it, and it's interesting to read this first one because we first had her name as Elizabeth, and I think I remember at the time when I saw Elizabeth, I was like, oh man, that's a really English sounding name. Like
Yeah,
that's not a good like German sounding.
makes me wonder if we just grabbed that off of just threw it in there to
Right,
get a
yeah,
name in.
like
Yeah,
it's kind of old timey, like when you think like, oh, what's like somebody from the '40s name, you'd be like, oh, Elizabeth, okay.
yeah.
But anyway, I remember, yeah, because I remember I think I gave you a little bit of notes on what I wanted narration stuff to say, and you wrote some pretty good narration, I must say, because it's something that's gone through all of the iterations of the script, is that your words get in there somehow. So you deserve
Well,
a additional material written by Brent Parsons credit
see,
in
I'll
this
have to
episode.
I'll have to look it over again because, like I said, I
Yeah.
I remember when I sent that stuff to you several weeks ago, and I haven't looked at it since I sent it, but I found it in the archives of
Yeah.
of the Gmail, and I forwarded that off to you, and I remember glancing and seeing some narration, but I couldn't remember, I couldn't tell you if I wrote that or we wrote that or how that was, but
Yeah, and I think
yeah, I remember
yeah,
that.
but yeah, it was good that I was giving it to somebody else to look through. But I just remember that primarily we kind of started developing the idea of like, okay, somebody's this character is going to be writing about something in her book, and already I'm always just like at the time it was just like, oh yeah, that's good that she's writing about something, but now I'm like, one of my pet peeves is I'm just like, if if you have a story about somebody that's writing something in a movie, or if they're typing something, that's kind of boring because
Yeah.
because it is. It's just like you're not writing a book, you're writing a movie. In a movie, you got to show people what's going on, and you
Yeah,
can't
you're
like show
either
people
gonna
writing. Yeah.
you're gonna expect them to either have to read it off the page, or you're gonna have somebody narrate the way through it. Which, if you're gonna do that, you better have some pretty rock solid narration and somebody,
Yeah.
a Morgan Freeman type voice saying it to you. So, because
Yeah.
otherwise,
Right.
like you say,
Yeah.
it's gonna get old real
Yeah.
fast. So,
Like a good example of that is the. Are you familiar with Lemony Snicket's series of unfortunate events?
not well enough to probably know what you're gonna say about it.
Well, it's like a good example of that is that when they made the movie with Jim Carrey, it's like they had Jude Law like sitting in a clock tower, who's supposed to be like the narrator telling you the story because that's how it is in the books, and he's just like typing away at this typewriter, using his Jude Law voice, saying like, "Oh, how this story is terrible and all these things happen." And I'm like, this is boring.
Yeah.
Like why is he doing that? Or like, like who's he typing it for? And it's just at the time I was like, this doesn't work. But recently on Netflix they redid it where it's Putty from Seinfeld. Patrick. His name's escaping me, but anyway, he's the narrator, and he's doing it more like a Rod Serling Twilight Zone thing, where he's
Oh,
like
okay.
actually addressing the audience and talking to them and stuff. And I was like, yes, that's how you do it. Like that is how you do
That's how you do
things that are
narration. Yeah.
filmed. Is that somebody needs to be telling you that? It's like it can't be somebody just typing away at a computer or a typewriter or something, because it's like, okay, like you're writing something, like who are you writing it for? But it's like with this one, it's like, okay, he's directly telling you what's going on here and stuff. And I was like, that's how you do a visual medium thing. So
Right.
so already I'm trying to trash this, but I swear it ties into something later. But anyway, the idea that we had was that we were like, okay, let's take this character, and how about she's fantasizing what it would be like to be in the future. And we just kind of came up with all these notions of like, okay, of course she would want to be in America because, that's kind of a grand place that they were thinking of at the time. And then she was
Right.
thinking about like, okay, obviously I don't want to be persecuted for, what religion I am, like I am right now.
Right.
And then we had like this, just this weird idea that I had that I remember that was funny. How I think this was stuff that I told you about, and you ultimately wrote it. Was that I had this whole passage about like, oh well, in this where I am, in this world now, I have to wear the Star of David because I'm forced to, and because it will tell people who I am, in a negative way. She says, I
Yeah.
want to wear it more proudly, something that I'm willing to wear on my own. And I think I said like, oh, she has a Star of David necklace, but somehow you misinterpreted that and you made it so that she was wearing a Star of David T-shirt. And I was just like, oh, hey, I was like, hey, I was like that could still work. I was like, yeah,
They
keep that, keep that.
She picked it up at the Hot Topic or something.
Yeah, yeah, order, yeah, or yeah. There's
Ordered it
some
on
sort of,
Amazon.
yeah. I was like, you don't need to, explain that. It's just like, but I'm just like, no, that's good because it's like it's hard to show somebody like in real close up, like, oh, here's my necklace here, or
That
something like
that
that's
may
kind
have. I'll say that was the thought process behind it.
of. No, it was good because I'm just like, that's good because when you're making like when you're writing a book or something, or you're writing stuff, you can just say that, and you're like, somebody's like, okay, I can picture somebody wearing a necklace, but in a
Right.
movie, it's hard to show that. But if she's wearing a T-shirt, that'll show better. So
Yeah,
I was
pretty
like,
obvious. You
okay,
don't have to
yeah, I'm all
do
for that.
extreme close-ups or anything like that. Yeah.
Right. And then just went through like, okay, she'd want to study medicine because she wants to make people feel better, and we just had all these lists of stuff like we were basically going to show in a montage of like everything she's doing that makes her life great. And then we were just like, okay, we got all that, now what happens next?
Right.
and and when
We
we
got the
and
montage.
Yep, and after we did that, we were just like, okay, well, obviously she would want to explore romance in her life. So then we came up with this other character, Carl, that comes into her life. And to me, this is kind of where the story just kind of veered into something that I was like, oh, why would somebody do this? But basically, what we did was that we like wrote as though if this character like got into an abusive relationship and just was battered by the end of it, and I guess like the whole thinking was that, oh, at the end when when the Nazis find her hiding place and she leaves behind her book, is that, oh, the twist is that, oh, you see the head guy there, he looks like Carl. So
Oh,
like,
that's right. Okay, I remember that.
Yeah, it was, yeah, and I think that was just in there just for the sake of making just for the sake
a dramatic scene. Yeah,
a dramatic. Yeah, that was our big idea.
Right.
And
I remember that. Okay.
and it was just, and I just remember that was kind of what would stall us, was that I would always be sitting around. I'm like, why would somebody write all of this optimistic stuff, and then suddenly, why would they have this inkling to
take
talk
a right
about,
turn? Yeah.
yeah, to talk about abusive relationships or something? That's why I'm just like, okay, you better have like a really good explanation, a really good way to write that in, because otherwise I was just like, not quite feeling
not gonna work.
Right. So it was like that for a while, and I guess, I don't know if you were real adamant about having that last part in there, just to have something in there, and I couldn't really think of anything. So at that point, I was just like, okay, we'll just kind of scrap that, and that's when I was that we'll just and that's when I was just like, okay, let me just think about this without like the idea, because I remember I was just like, okay, well, it's like we're kind of holding ourselves back if we want to transport her into the present. And I think there was other ideas about like, oh, something happens and then she ends up here, and then she kind of gets a taste of the world or stuff before she dies, and it was just like there's so many iterations to go through. And then I guess there still is other ones that you could do with that notion today. Like you could make her like, she's talking, like it's like, imagine she's like writing a letter to her ancestor or something, and this is how she's coping with that, and you get to see her read that and react. Like, because I'm pretty sure if you sit around and if we had so many more hours to kill, we could come up with more concepts for that. But that's for another time. But ultimately, it came down to, there was a screenwriting competition at my school that was done the previous year, and there was a category for shorts, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna actually come up with an idea, with kind of this general idea for something that I want to do. So I think this was kind of more when you were probably developing your other ideas at the time. So that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna just be by myself on this one, and and I kind of took a couple elements from yours here and there, but
right.
But ultimately, it came down to when I was writing the script, which, by the way, it ended up that the competition didn't get held that year, so I didn't get to enter it. So I was kind of like, oh, man. But still, at the same time, I was like, oh, I wrote a script.
Yeah. So did this end up, so where you're going with this, did this end up just being a short film script, or did you develop this into a longer feature type script? Because I can't remember.
Well, at this point, this was when I was just like, okay, I'm gonna write for a short. I'm just gonna take one of these ideas that I had. Right. Like, basically, this is what I'm gonna describe. Like, this is almost like, as I called it, I was like, this is like the holiday episode of what this fantasy idea is gonna take place in. I know it sounds weird, like, but as I get into it, I'll explain the holiday angle of it. But anyway, looking at the script now that I did ultimately write, I see that I started off with a title sequence that has music box music, like a score in the background, and we were shown a still photographs montage showing this character, who I ultimately named Joanna Margaret Kirshner. And already I'm kind of in a little bit, it was almost too perfect, because I did find out that there was somebody named Joanna Kirshner, but Kirshner was spelled differently.
there you
It's
go.
like, yeah, so I probably need to rethink the name, but I'm always like, God, still really like the name, you know.
Yeah,
But
sounds good.
maybe if you make it more like Kirshner or Korsh, some,
Hey,
yeah.
you're different from what it showed. I think you're fine.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's spelled a little different, but anyway, it's like the name Joanna comes from from, I guess, a couple things, because there was somebody that I did meet that was Jewish, and she went to Harvard, and I got to meet her and talk to her for a little bit, and I took her name. I took her name from that, and then also in Sweeney Todd, there's a character Joanna in that one, so that's what she's named after. And then Margot, or Margaret, that's kind of like the German version of that.
Hmm.
That's from the actress who was in Dirty Pool. Her name was Margaret as well, except it was spelled the traditional way. But this was, like Margot Kidder,
Hmm.
and so like that was like the other. So that was like the other. That was kind of like the joint inspiration for that one. And then Kirshner comes from the director Irvin Kershner of Empire Strikes Back. So that's how I got my Jewish named character.
Okay.
And so as I see here, this is kind of one of the mistakes in the script, is that I'm very descriptive like a book, so because here I'm trying to say, oh, she has an imaginative mind and a nervous and sensitive personality. And then the idea was to show that, she has a literature mother for a teacher, and then she has an artisan father that has like a handicraft store. And then the idea in this montage was to show how Nazis came to power and how basically their place was left in shambles. And then this is when we get into the movie itself, where she's talking in narration while she's in like an abandoned shack basically at night, and she's trying to start a fire.
Right.
And she pretty much tells you what I already said in the montage. So already I'm like, oh, this is another script writing mistake, where it's like, oh, great, you're, like, why didn't you
Repeating
just
what you...
start, yeah, why didn't you just start off with this?
Right.
Because like this tells us all what we need to know here.
That's why you got drafts.
Right, yeah. I'm just like, yeah, yeah. This is why this probably didn't get made. But yeah, but anyway, so after we set up that, okay, she's writing some kind of story, and there's like a little bit of voiceover, and and then I put like a little bit in there, like, oh, she's visibly tired and she's rubbing her eyes a little bit, and then I write that we transition to the overhead shot of Joanna lying in a haystack bed, which I was like, oh, that would make the most sense, that she would, have some kind of setup like that. And basically what happens is that there's some, at this point, it's kind of like the morning or some point like that, and she hears some rustling outside. So immediately I'm trying to make the audience think like, oh, somebody's out there and somebody's found her. But then when she looks through the cracks of the shack, she sees like a pair of horns, and then she sees like a black nose and and these black eyes, and it's like, oh, it's just a deer, just kind of around the area. And then it's like, okay, that's some nice relief. But then suddenly a gunshot is heard, and then you're just like, and then you're like,
The
now
deer
you're
hits the
like,
ground.
yeah. Right, yeah, and then you're just like, oh, what's like now what's the threat going on? And then I had this shot in mind where it's like, oh, you see these black pair of boots like step into frame, and then the stock of the rifle drops right in the middle of it, and it's revealed that, oh, it's a huntsman, and he's got his son with him, and he's like, oh, look, father, you hit him. And I had I just look at this dialogue, and I'm like, yeah, it rightfully is clunky, where it's like, I told you that the Great War made your father a great marksman. It's like, just, yeah, I know, it's just,
Again, first draft stuff.
right, yeah. This is like, yeah, I'm just like, yeah, definitely, this is something that needs to be revised
You gotta,
and stuff. And then
you got to get it on paper somehow, though.
and then and then the boy goes, and then the son goes like, oh, I heard something rustle around in there. He's like, oh, that's just a mouse, or that's something in there. It's like, would you rather have that for supper, or would you rather have that as our holiday meat instead? And that was kind of supposed to like perk up like her interest, because like Joanna's like trying to visit, trying to listen to what's going on, but visibly very, like doesn't want to be noticed.
Right.
And while they're talking, they say something like, while they're talking about like, oh, something's going to be coming up for, what's coming up. She mentions holidays, and then, and I write something like, oh, as they're dragging off this bloody carcass of the dead deer, a sense of hopeful bliss fills Joanna's face. I'm like, oh, okay. And then as I write here, it's just like, oh, she's like straightening her clothes and kind of looking more presentable. And it's like I say, like, oh, it's like while she says this voiceover, they're visualized, and basically she's just saying like, oh, well, at this time of the year when it was the holidays, you could always count on everyone's generosity to give you something, or my father was really into that, and everybody else followed that. So she's kind of driven into, well, maybe I should try to come out of the shack and actually go to where the holidays are going on, because maybe I can kind of replenish on what I have, because everybody's not really going to be caring about asking who you are or what you're doing. They're going to be so enamored in like the holiday. So that's
Right.
that's her motivation to go into the town. As I say here, it's like, I don't intend to starve, and perhaps the holiday generosity could not be completely forgotten. It is a risk worth taking. So I guess at this
Good.
point I'm more like, because I guess at this point when I'm more like, okay, when like this kind of voiceover would be something that's going on in her head, not necessarily something writing down or something. But again, that's kind of like a big no in film, is that it's like, no, don't try to get internalized with them, because that's something you can only do in a book, where you
Right.
can listen to what's going on in somebody's head and stuff. Like, you have to show it, because otherwise
Right.
you're just writing a book.
Yeah, when
So,
you're writing it for the screen, you gotta keep that in mind.
right. So yeah, you got to have the huntsman character and stuff say all that stuff that was said in the voiceover, and of course
Exactly.
you're like, oh, the dialogue's clunky and stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm trying to make it sound like something that would come out of somebody's mouth. But anyway, what happens is that, okay, she makes her trek into the town square, and when she gets there, she's like visually like horrified at what has happened. And how I described it was that, I said, it's like, let's see, what did I say here? Like, this is not the holiday festival that she remembered. Instead, it is a sick and appalling vision of the festival suited for Nazi ideology. And I said that the nativity scene is altered with the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus having blonde-colored hair and blue-colored eyes representing Aryans. And
Wow.
and this was actually based off of like what they did,
Right.
that back then pretty much they made Christmas like winter solence, and they like they altered it. They actually did do that, and I've like seen pictures, and I've read and I've read about this, and like at one point she sees Nazi soldiers giving away war themed toys. And then kind of like, I guess this was almost like my poster moment, I guess you could say, if I was going to make one, was that she stands at the town's tree, and right on top of it is an illuminated swastika.
Oh man,
So I was, so again, already, if I'm
that
like
would be a poster shot for
right, yeah,
sure.
and already I'm already thinking like, how am I gonna, like, even if I try to film this, like, how am I gonna convince somebody to put that on top or something? I was like, oh,
Yeah, I don't
just
know if you're gonna find illuminated swastika on Amazon
yeah,
or
yeah, you're gonna have to, yeah, you're
anything
gonna have to
like
like
that.
make a special effects shot of that or something.
Right,
Just film a
right.
regular one and do that. But I write that despite this vision of it, everyone is being very they're giving away stuff. They're giving away stuff to people, and she kind of has a sack. She's kind of making it not so discreet that she's like collecting food, but it's like like they're being very generous and stuff. And
Yeah,
like the idea is like, oh well, despite this being terrible, people are in the spirits, and nobody's
it's
asking
the
me,
holidays.
like what's going on here.
Yeah,
Just a little bit of so it's like she's supposed to, so it's like, okay, great, she has all this stuff, and she's gotten her bread, she's gotten some fruits from very thankful people, and she's like, okay, now I can go back to where I am, and everything will be all right. And this was interesting because when I wrote down my rundown of everything, I remember I was just in there. I just said, okay, at this point, Joanna gets robbed and she gets knocked out. But at the time, I was
After she's left this house.
right, yeah, or yeah, after
Okay.
she's kind of left the town, she's kind of back on the way
Okay.
she was.
Right.
So I remember writing this, and I remember when I got to this point in the script, I was like, okay, now I'm gonna have to introduce another character, and like, where did this guy come from and stuff. And I was like, that doesn't work. Like, what should I do? And I thought, wait a minute, I already established two other characters earlier in the story. Use them. So in this case, when the barrel is, as I described, as barreled is aimed right at her head, it's revealed that it's the huntsman.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I was like,
I was
okay,
afraid
this
to say when you said I had two other people. I was afraid to say, "No, you're talking about the huntsman and his son, right? Or did I miss something?"
right,
So,
yeah. I was just like,
yeah,
yeah,
gotcha.
just like, yeah, the only two other ones. So and then I was like, oh yes, yes. And then I kind of wrote it so it's like, oh, in the dark, he's gonna have like a much sinister looking face, and then the idea was that it's like, oh, they take her stuff, they take their stuff away from her, and then like, oh, the huntsman's son like gets the bag from her. He's like, oh, it looks like we have a heavy traveler here. And then he was just like, yeah, I told you there would be somebody foolish enough to try to make their way through tonight. And then he says, just to make sure, and that's when he takes that barrel of the gun that I totally didn't have this plan, but he takes that, the barrel of it, and he hits her right on the back of the head with it.
Oh
And I
man.
was like, okay, this is, yeah, of course, I'm like, God, this is terrible and
Yeah,
stuff.
you're
But
getting
I'm
pretty
just like, but
hardcore now.
right, yeah, because now I'm just like, oh, and I was like, oh, look at that. See, I established something earlier where where I had that shot where the barrel comes, or the stock comes between his legs. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, well, that's good. That's establishing that that's there, and then now we're going to use that again to do this. And then I was like, oh, and it's good that I have the kid there, so that the kid can react to it like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that, and so,
Right.
as they run off. And then the idea was that, like, while she's lying there in the snow, you hear that music box music again, and then it fades to white, and you're going to think, okay, that's the end of the story. But then when we fade back up, her eyes are open, and she's sitting, or she's lying in this really comfortable bed. So already I'm just like, okay, now I've taken the story into this other realm where I'm just like, okay, now is this her imagining what it's like when she's dying, or is this something real?
Right.
Because like because she gets up and she notices that like she's in like some kind of, like she's like in like like a nightgown basically.
Right.
And just like, and as I see here, I wrote like, oh, it's eerily similar to the abandoned shack she was in before, but it's comfortable to the extreme. Like, there's a fireplace, there's just all this,
Yeah, it's
nice
not like
stuff
a
here.
hideout like it was in the very
Right,
opening
yeah.
scene. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's just like, oh, so
this is a
so I'm trying
this
to
is
be
a habited
clever.
building.
Right, so
It's
like,
inhabited.
yeah, right, yeah, like I'm trying to be clever, where it's like, okay, well, look at where she was now, and look where she is here. So with that one, obviously, you'd have to have some good production design to make sure that they kind of match, kind of almost
Yeah.
have like the same area, but just a little bit, like that was a big
Some
contrast.
subtle differences. Okay.
Right, and then so she looks in the mirror and she notices that she has a bruise where she got hit. So it's like, okay, so we're establishing like, okay, like this, it's not like, oh, you just died and now everything is perfect and you're not wounded at all. And then what happens is that, oh, somebody knocks at the door, and I write, it's a young man enters, and he's like in like a lot more formal clothes. And he tells her like, oh, well, it's nice to see that you can walk. And he's like, oh, well, she's just, and of course she's just staring at this person like, who are you, basically, in shock. And he's like, oh, well, my name is Carl, and my father and I found you in the snow.
Hmm.
And she's like, oh, well, yes, I was robbed by a scavenger. And he's like, oh, you were? It's like, I can't believe somebody would do this to somebody on the
Yeah.
holidays. And he's like, in any case, are you hungry? And again, she's just like, kind of wanted to say, well, duh, but
Well, yeah.
yeah, yeah, right. It's like, yeah, exactly. Like, she's like, oh, well, And he goes, and of course he's like, "Oh, well, silly me, of course you are." And it's like, "Oh, our family's gathered downstairs for a holiday feast. And we just happen to have room for one more. That if you want to stay." Which I guess to me when I'm reading this, I'm like, "Oh boy, that's pretty convenient, isn't it?" But hey, this is
Cozy, you're Hannibal Lecter.
yeah, right. Yeah, you're just like, "Oh boy, wow, I'm in good hands here."
We're making the switch to horror now, apparently.
I know, yeah. See. I think when I was talking with somebody like this, when I was talking to somebody else about the story, he was like, "Okay, so when I was reading your script, I was hoping that at this point it was going to turn into, since you're wanting to emphasize more fairy tales and stuff, like this is going to turn into Hansel and Gretel and stuff." I was like, "Okay, that's dark." I mean, I already spent the first half of this movie being pretty dark. Now in this one, I really want to emphasize more of a light thing to it.
Yeah, sure.
And then, but anyway, she does say like, "Oh well, I'm afraid I'm not properly dressed for this," and then of course another convenient thing is like, "Oh my sister, oh well, this is my sister's room, and oh she has clothes there that I think will fit you." And just like, "Okay, well, when you're ready, just come on down," and everything. Which I'm just like, of course, I'm just like, yeah, is this a usual German thing? Are they
now you're getting away from your comfort zone and knowing your history, and now you're kind of venturing into, is this plausible?
Right. But anyway, so anyway, she gets dressed up, and she has, I said, a very decent blue dress, and I guess it was good that she had makeup there and everything, and then I was just, wow. And then I made the note that like, oh, she looks more like how she looks at the beginning before all this happened, because I think I mentioned at some point in the script like, oh, her face is visibly kind of worn and kind of cold, kind of like how your skin is if you've been out in the cold too much.
Right. Now, how much time has passed since the opening scene until now?
Opening scene. Well, I want to, I guess at this point when I wrote it, it'd be at least a day or something, because it's like the idea was like, okay, that's what I described at the beginning. That's like a previous night, and then it transitioned to morning, and then she makes her trek up there, and then it's kind of more mid-evening when she's going around getting all her stuff, and then
when they knocked her out, and then
yeah, like
you didn't know at that point when she woke up. Was it
it's evening.
Was it a dream, or have we made a big time jump? But no, it's just
now it all seems like it's all been like a big cohesive thing the whole time. And so anyway, she gets down, and it's like, oh, there's music coming from the radio. There's just a nice gathering of people around, and thankfully no Nazis.
Yeah,
and
that's always plus.
So anyway, it's like, oh, and then I have like the father come up. It's just like, oh. So it's like, oh, well, we met. Oh, we found somebody that had a scruffle. And it's like, what was your name again? And I guess she's kind of scared at first to say, oh, Joanna. Say a name that's kind of sounds Jewish like Joanna. So she does say Joanna. But then he's just like, well, Miss Joanna, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Let me introduce you to everybody. And so
because at this point she has no idea if they're Jewish, if they're Nazis.
Right? Yeah, or just can these people be trusted? It's like, well. You kind of got thrusted into this, and it's just, they just see her as just like they're taking pity on her because it's the holidays, and like, oh, we found somebody that was out in the cold and stuff, and we needed to save her. It doesn't matter if she's Jewish or not. But
even though we knocked her out, we need to save her.
Right. or somebody found her, even though, yeah.
Well, okay, so the people that found her, is you said that the sun that came down, was that not?
No.
Is she not in the house of the people that knocked her out?
No. These are like completely different people.
Okay, sorry. I took it as being when you said the sun walked down, that it was the same sun from the beginning.
No.
And then you said, my father. That's where I was kind of like, this is getting sadistic a little bit.
No. This is a completely different thing.
Completely different family. Gotcha.
Yeah. But anyway, it's like, okay, so Carl meets back up with her, and it's like, oh, have you gotten to know everybody? And it's like, well, yeah, it's so nice to, be here with your family and stuff. And he's just like, well, it's a shame that every day of the year can't be like this. And, it's like, yes, you're right. And then, and then of course it's like, okay, well, I haven't seen your sister around here. Where is she? And she's like, oh, well, she died during a bombing this summer. And then... And then this is where I'm going to acknowledge that I took a little something from Star Trek Generations, where it's like in that story, Captain Picard's nephew dies in a fire, and when he's talking to somebody about it, he says, "Oh no, it's perfectly all right. It's and he has to be told, no, it's not all right that happened." So I kind of put that in this script where she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that this happened," and then "Oh no, it's all right. It's like this has been happening to families all over here, and it's just a way of life." And she's like, "No, it's not all right. No one with a family like yours deserves to die for a cause for what's being fought for."
Well, now we're at the Oscar clip.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. This is when I won that best writing award. And she's just like, and he's just like, "Oh, well, what do you mean by that?" And just like, "Well, I was all by myself until you found me in the snow." And they were just like, "What? You don't have a family to go home to?" And she's like, "No, I lost them, like how you lost your sister." And just like with him, that's when he's really shocked at that. At that, and on that note, that's when Carl's father says, "Dinner served." But so what happens is that when she sits at then the idea is going on is that she's sitting at this table, and while everyone's talking, conversing, she just starts to notice that it's like she doesn't belong here. She feels like she's invading something, and then I think I wrote like an idea, like she starts picturing people that she knew from like that photo montage that we saw, and she's just so overridden with guilt that she basically excuses herself, and she runs out into the cold, and with that it's like, oh, the makeup's coming off her face, and she's walking, and she like sees other things in the window of people being pleasant and stuff, and it's just really upsetting her.
The guilt of no longer suffering got to her.
Right. And she just feels like
she felt like she had to put herself back into that position.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Good. Hey, good. Hey, did you write this too? No.
No, it just means you wrote it very well that I understand.
Good. I'm glad somebody does. Good. But anyway, because I feel bad, because I feel like when I wrote that part in the script, I'm like, I'm just ripping off that part in Home Alone when before he goes to the church, he looks at that one window, and he sees another family that's doing that. I was like, it could, but I was being careful not to like, oh, she sits there and dwells at that look. It's like it was like something in the background, but I remember that was kind of like that was like the thing on that one. It's like, oh, she sees that, and
I don't know that too many people would see that and think Home Alone right away. So I think
if I would have lingered on it, which
you might.
Yeah, I want to. And just a side note, just for a second, I'm glad that Macaulay Culkin wasn't crying during that scene, because if you read the script for that, it was described that he looks at that and he starts crying over that, and I was like, oh, thank you, you didn't do that. You let the song that they were playing, that Somewhere in My Memory, do the work for us, so we're the ones crying, and I was like, yes, thank you.
Yeah,
so thank you, Chris Columbus, on that one. Thank you very much. Thank you. Just a little side note. Sorry about that detour. But when we get to this is when we get to a point where she gets to she finds an old burned out synagogue that, of course, was part of the deal where they basically they ransacked and burned down any Jewish Jewish places in the town. So anyway, she seeks refuge in there, and she goes in, and or I guess I should say, there's a scene that's before that where she wanders into a graveyard, and when she wipes off the snow off of them, she sees like painted on the headstones like Jude, and they have like just real derogatory things about it, because it was something that I read about where they were like literally doing that to defacing headstones and stuff. And then again, I was just like, oh, that's like another scene where it's like, oh, that'll be another reminder of like what she's in, and then that would go into the all burnt out synagogue, and she finds and she seeks sanctuary in there, and the idea was that somehow she would find like one of those the candles that have like all of the I think it's 8 of them, 8 candles for him, and it's like somehow she, somehow it's like, I was like, somehow she's able to light them, even though this doesn't make no sense. I'm just like, somehow she, it was like the idea would be like she lights them for a source of warmth, but you're right along the lines of how would she be able to. This could be, you could be running up against your Macaulay Culkin crying scene.
It may just need to be the thought that she could light them, but because she is out there, has nothing, and is alone and on the run.
But it's like,
it's just another thing
yeah,
where
I don't know. Maybe
I
she,
can't like these.
maybe one of the things she took was some matches or something, and
Yeah,
like before
sure.
that, you would see like her get some matches and put them in her pocket or something, and then she digs them out, and somehow she's like, but anyway, like where's the, is there candles on there, or
Sure,
is there
yeah, I
some kind
get
of
that.
oil
Well,
in
that
there?
that makes perfect sense because if you're on the run like that, or if you're out in the cold, and you see some matches laying there, of course you're going to grab those because you know that
Yeah, you'll
that
need them.
night you're
Yeah,
probably going to need a fire, and so yeah, that makes. I mean, I'd buy
yeah,
that.
yeah. You just have to, make sure you put that when you're filming that. Make sure you insert. You got a little insert of that, so that's so people
Yeah,
don't go, "Oh,
have her grab some
did she
matches.
just pull matches out of nothing?" But anyway, the idea with that was that for each one she lights, she stares at the flame, and it was like the idea was that you were supposed to like zoom in on the white flame of it, and you were going to see these etched representations of her family and everything. And then this is when I let
Very cool.
and then this is when I was like, okay, now really got to get the point across with some narration. And it's like, she says that, I realize now that, who, like my parents, they've always been with me. I continue to live because that's what they wanted me to do. No matter what hardships and prejudice endure, it is important to remember the goodness that is still in everybody. It may be just for a moment in time, but it's better than an entire lifetime of sorrow. Generosity was what my father strived for, and I walked out on it.
Very nice. You wrote that?
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's like, yeah, I think mostly your stuff is kind of at the beginning of it, and I guess at this point there must have just been something in me that just wanted to write all that out, and like I gotta admit, when I was writing this, I did feel it and everything. But yeah, I wrote
Yeah.
that.
So
And
now
then
is that the closing scene?
well, just a little bit more. But anyway,
Well,
the
okay.
idea
So I
was,
was gonna say, so you started out with narration, and now you're kind of capping it off with some narration
yeah,
too.
yeah. It's like it's like with this one, finally had to drive that point home. So then, what happens is that she blows out those candles. It's the black screen just like it was before, and then through the doorway, she's returned, and then they were like, oh, yeah, and everybody's standing at the doorway looking at her, and they're just like, oh, well, we were wondering where you went. We were wondering where you went, because we didn't want you to miss the choir that we are going to attend.
No, this is back at Carl's
Yeah,
house.
back at
Okay.
Carl's house, and then she's
Okay.
just like, "Oh, I just had to." It was like, "Oh, that doesn't matter at all. What's important is that you're here, and that we would love for you to come with us." And then it's yeah, I guess Carl says that, and he's like, "Oh, absolutely, if that's fine with you." And then it's like, "Oh," she smiles, and then it transitions to what I call the jazz singer ending, where I was just like, like I said earlier, I was a fan of that, and the big finale of that is that, oh, Neil Diamond sings America at the end, and it's a big moment, because it all tied in with everything. And to me, this was like my moment where I was just like, okay, you hear this beautiful choir singing songs that, as I said, as I described in the script, like those with a good ear will know that all references to Jesus and everything are taken out, which is what they actually did with those songs when they're singing. And
Yeah.
then the idea is just like, oh, probably at first she's a little kind of, like, oh, I'm a Jewish person in this, obviously Christian thing. Am I supposed to be here? Am I supposed to enjoy this? But then she gets into it, and then it's very beautiful, very, very, like the ending's going to be, oh, they're just listening to this beautiful Christmas Carol stuff. And and again, this is probably me going into the Home Alone mentality, because I do love that scene in the church and everything, where they're, the music and everything. I think that's kind of what I was going for. I was like, okay, that's
And the one in Home Alone.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
That's a good scene.
I deliberately made the last page a transition to a close up of a pencil writing in a journal, a passage that is describing the events we have just witnessed. It is revealed that this has all been a story by Joanna, who still appears ragged, worn, and sickly than when we saw her at the beginning of the movie. So, as you can see, I wrote a frame where you thought it was going to transition into like what was going on from when we first saw her at the beginning, but really that was a transition to go into the mindset, because I kind of wrote in that thing where she's like rubbing her eyes and looking like she's getting ready to go to sleep or something.
Right.
And so basically I pulled the old trick of like, oh, it was all just a dream, or what you saw
Right.
didn't happen. It was just
But with an interesting spin on it, though. I mean that So it was her dreaming about, normally somebody in that situation probably would be, anytime they'd go to sleep or drift off or something, would have the nightmares of being chased by a Nazi, or nightmares of seeing concentration camps and that sort of thing. But what she's dreaming about is, she's still on the run, but she's at no point in any of this was she ever there's no Nazi soldiers or anything shows up in any of this, from what I gathered. I mean, from what I was listening to, I don't think you ever mentioned that. I mean, you did kind of the old switcheroo where she got the barrel of the gun pointed at her head, but then when that pans out, you find out that that's just, a huntsman and his boy, and that sort of thing. Just they're trying to survive as well, and just like she is. And then, but every time she encounters somebody, it seems like she kind of sees, the goodness in people that's still there.
Right. Right.
And so it's almost like the dreams, or the, whatever she's having in her head is almost, you did the dream sequence, but not in a bad way. You did it in to where she's seeing, the good things.
Right.
Is what I'm kind of getting from it.
Yeah, but I'm just like, but I'm just like, you're always tricky with stuff like this, because some people don't like payoffs like that. Like, they just like that completely. I was like, oh great, so what you just made was just completely pointless, and like it didn't matter or something. But I guess I was trying to save it with the narration at the end, where it's just like, although you can't expect life to be a fairy tale, writing this story has given me a few moments that help me forget the atrocities of what has happened, and hope to not only for myself but those in the future. I hope I won't be the only person who reads this. And then
to me that wraps it up perfectly.
Right.
Even if someone is sitting there looking at it going, man, that you just copped your way out of it with it being a dream sequence, I think the narration saves it.
Right.
That really wraps it up tight.
And then oh, my big thing is that, oh, she finally goes to sleep, and then it's like, oh, you see a little tear running down her eye, and I said something like, whether this is for the story she has written or for her loneliness she is suffering is undetermined. Which I'm always just like, yeah, I guess I'm trying to think like the critic or something. It's like, oh, what would the critic think of this when he saw it? Or like, but I get, and it's like I'm always told, like, oh, don't write passages like that in your screenplay, because it's.
Yeah, but it'll be this way on this podcast. Anybody that comes on telling their story, we're not looking for proper script writing or anything like that. I mean, if you've done it, great, congratulations. But just like I said with Dirty Pool, the entire way through that, I was visualizing it in my head how I would shoot it, and so I would put those types of things, like close-ups on this and panning out this way, and because to me that stuff was going to be important to be able to tell the story. And so putting, little notes like that in your script or in your story, I see no issue with that. We're not pitching a professional, screenplay to a Hollywood producer or any kind of a competition here. We're just sharing them and talking about them.
But and then the last passage that I wrote is that all I know is that my mother was correct about fairy tales. Even if she was killed for her beliefs and her values, I appreciate all the creativity blessed to me by my family, especially in the situation I face now. For my idea of fantasy is a realm of escapism to make sorry, I suck at reading. To make a realm of escapism that makes me survive in the harshest of times. And then it was supposed to be she goes to sleep, cut to black, the end.
Very cool. Fantastic. I'm going to give it a round of applause.
No, it's
nice.
It's far from perfect, and it's something that really, it's something that, every time when I tell the story to people, they are interested and they like it, but I'm just like, I just feel like it's a conclusion to something I haven't fully told yet, because I've had like other ideas of how I wanted to handle things, but I think
you're never going to be done with it. You're going to be revising it till God knows when. But
I feel like
I mean that version, hearing that based on what we started with, and then after I dropped off, and then you've developed it to that point. I mean, that's pretty sweet. That's a good story.
Yeah, so, but I'm always, I will say that I'm always like the conscious, like I think like the critic and stuff like that. But I guess you should just, if you feel that way about it, you should do it, because I guess I always think like, oh God, everybody really hates that Rob Reiner movie North, where it's like pretty much it's kind of like a same thing where it's like, oh, you think that you think what's happening throughout this movie is going on for real, which is a lot. There's a lot more things going on, but then at the end of it, it's revealed, oh, it was all in Elijah Wood's dream that he fell asleep in a mall in a chair or something.
Right.
Because I guess if you think about that, like, wouldn't they poke at him and say like, hey, get out of that chair, kid, or something like that? But no.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point with this, is that nobody's gonna catch her or wake her up or whatever when she was kind of from what I remember the beginning of this, she was all in that little cabin or whatever it was, where this was all kind of taking place. So that no, completely believable to me, and I think you've developed that extremely nicely. I enjoyed hearing it.
Good. Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've dug this out, because it always is something, you're just like, I want to get away from it for a while. Let me, because I have come back with ideas more stronger than when I started off. And I don't know, maybe this is worth a few more looks, because there's a whole nother thing that I kind of developed with it, with more backstory and more this, more that, and like, oh, there's more of a central villain thing kind of going on there. That is kind of interesting and stuff. Which what I was mentioning earlier, those are like the two parts of a story that I told, like, that I was saying like, oh, it's 6. So I'm basically like, what I just read to you was the 6th part, and then there's like 2 other parts to it, but
you have to come back on.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to as soon as I can figure out where to take it and stuff. But yeah, just basically the whole idea is like, okay, the Nazis had a really screwed up version of how they viewed the Christmas time and stuff, and I was like, okay, let's put a Jewish character in the midst of all that, and what would happen, and
Very good.
Yep.
I think it came out well.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you coming on and talking to me about it, and anyone listening, I'm pretty sure they're going to appreciate it and find it pretty darn entertaining, just like I did. So
yeah, now it's your turn, folks.
Thanks again.
To come up and take my spot on here.
Absolutely, yeah. Reach out, email me, all of the social media sites. Let me know if you got a story and you want to come on and talk about it, and we will get it set up just like we did with Dan. Again, we are not in the same place. This is all done remotely over the internets, and so Dan is sitting at home comfortably, probably on the toilet right now, I'm guessing, but
that would explain the echo.
There you go. So, all right, well, thanks for coming on, and I guess we will talk to everybody later.
Thanks again, Brent.